Hi, I'm Zane Dearien. I'm out here in Mississippi with the Mossy Oak boys at the deer cabin. Today I'm going to show y'all how to make the wild boar tasso and braised greens. Today what we'll be working with is Gamekeeper's wild boar tasso, some collard greens from down the road, yellow onions, garlic, chili flakes, apple cider vinegar, canned tomatoes, salt and pepper to your liking, and I like to gussy it up with a little bit of chicken bouillon base and some mustard powder. So first step, get your Dutch oven cast iron going over medium-high heat, and while that's heating up and getting the temperature right, we'll start breaking down some of this tasso. And what we do here is we got about a half a pound to a pound of tasso. You're gonna cut it up into small cubes. What this will do is give us a lot of surface area to dissipate the flavor and the spices that it's been cured in. Also help render out some of that fat and make it crispy, kind of like a little pancetta bacon bite. You can also cut it in any length or size that you need. I personally like a smaller bite, so that way you get a bunch of it in every bite that you get when you're cooking. The idea is to let all of the ingredients meld together in this long braise. One important thing I will note out throughout this process, there's a lot of ingredients in which have been cured or touched by salt. So we will be seasoning throughout the process, checking for the solidity, checking for acid to make sure that we're not overwhelming one part or the other. But the main thing is to consistently taste and understand what's going into the pot. Again, we're not looking for anything perfect, just to kind of get everything kind of the same size, so everything, again, has an equal opportunity to meld and cook together and be happy. So now we got everything cubed up. We're gonna set this aside still while the pot's heating up. We're about to get it in there, get it going. So the key part of all this is that you have this nice marbling and fat throughout all of this tasso. So what you want to do is when you get it in the pot, you want to let that kind of melt down and kind of help bring some of that flavor out and bloom it while you're cutting the onions and garlic. All right, so next step, we're going to get these, get some yellow onions and some garlic, about per 4 or 5 bunches of collard greens, depending on the size. I like to use about 3 or 4 medium-sized small yellow onions. Again, this can be deleted or switched out for any kind of onion that you might be growing out your house. Vidalia, sweet onions, gold onions, it don't matter. So what we're gonna do is just go ahead and cut off all the tips of the onions first. Steps like this will kind of help your process move a lot smoother and easier. Trying to think of how you're working through the dish so that way you can be most efficient and everything kind of happens at the same time. All right, so now we got our onions. We'll set these aside. So what we have here is a whole head of garlic. What we'll do, smash it just on the table like this. And now what that does is breaks up all your cloves, gets all the paper going. Again, this kind of stuff, great for stocks and soups. All right, so now that we got all of our tasso, onions, and aromatics cut up, we're gonna go over here to the Dutch oven that we've been having preheat over medium-high heat. We'll make sure that the temp's not too hot. You don't want it smoking, because what we're gonna cook with our fat is, I like extra virgin olive oil. It adds a little bit of fruitiness to dishes. So what we're gonna do, big old glug, glug, glug of oil. Basically, you just wanna just cover the bottom of the Dutch oven to where there's just about a penny's depth worth of oil all the way across it. And then from there, we're gonna start adding in our tasso to start rendering out. So now we've got our tasso added to the Dutch oven. You're gonna immediately hear a little bit of sizzling. That's great. What that's doing is starting to break down the proteins, and you're infusing that oil. Again, why we're using fat in this process in the beginning is because this tasso has been smoked and cured and seasoned with a great amount of seasonings like paprika and things like that. So that you're trying to extract that flavor out into the oil and the fat that you're then gonna cook everything in, so that way it gets dispersed evenly throughout stuff. But it is important at this step. What you don't wanna have happen is walk away from this and go do something else, because the last thing you need to happen is burning all your hard work or letting things get too hot where it starts getting bitter. So it's all about controlled heat, stirring constantly, making sure things are getting seared and rendered out properly. So we've been rendering out our tasso for about 3 minutes now. That's a good timeline for the size that we cut it. If you've got something bigger, it might take a little bit more, but what you always don't want to do is be too late to the party on stirring and getting stuff like that. But we've been about 3 minutes. You can kind of hear, smell, listen, the diameter of the tasso is kind of going down. You're starting to get a little bit of a crispy edge, the crackling of the skin, the spices popping. You can really start smelling it. So right now we're gonna start dumping in our onions and letting those go to the party and hang out. All right, so at this point we've got the onions, the garlic mixed in with that tasso. What you're wanting to do as soon as you get in there, you wanna start stirring, coating the onions and the garlic and all that oil and that fat and stuff. What that's gonna do is start helping break down the garlic and onions to start softening them. You don't want it over high heat. This part of the cooking process is all about being low and slow. While this is cooking, we're gonna kind of start getting our greens cleaned up. So what we have here is good old collard greens. Few tips, make sure you wash them. When you wash them, dunk them in a lot of water. Let that water settle so that dirt goes away and you're not just washing them in there and picking it up and letting the dirt stick back on it. And from here, we're gonna clean all of our greens. Again, I just like to pull them because what that does also by pulling them is it kind of rips them up anyways, which we're going to be doing in just a minute while we introduce them to the pot. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, why haven't we added salt? So like we had mentioned before, the tasso comes pre-cured, so it's going to have some solidity to it. And the onions and garlic are going to help. We're going to let them have a chance to absorb some of that salinity. And when we start adding the greens and all the other ingredients, that's when we're going to start salting things as we go, so that way we're not either too early or too late. So what we're at this point, we've got our onions, tasso. Your onions and tasso are kind of coming out and they're looking translucent, as well as that garlic is. I am going to take a spoon at this point, take a little bit, taste it, see where we're at in the salt, things like that. Gonna take about a little 3-finger pinch, dust the onions, garlic, tasso, kind of see if we can pull out any of that extra moisture in them. And then we're gonna start loading in greens. So what we're gonna wanna be is we're gonna wanna be generous with adding the greens in there, and throughout the process, stirring them. Tear them as you go. If you haven't already pre-cut them, you don't have to be fancy about it. This is good old comfort food. So while we got the greens and everything in the pot kind of wilting down, we're gonna take we have a 28-ounce can of tomatoes. Opened up 2 cans. You don't have to use all 2 cans, but the important part, the reason why I like to buy them whole, is I like to crush them. So what we're gonna do is just take your hands. If you're not comfortable using your hands, you're more than welcome just to pull them out, run your knife through them. I just like to take them, break them off, break them a little crush. Again, whenever you're in this cooking process, think about how things are going to cook, but also think about textures at the end of it. Having some bigger chunks of tomatoes is great, but you also don't want just big honkers in there. So we're at a point now where our moisture is kind of drying up and evaporating. So we're going to go ahead and add some of these tomatoes. Yes, there's still a lot more greens to add, but what it'll do is kind of help deglaze the pan, get some of that caramelization from the bottom into the sauce. So we're going to add about half the tomatoes now. You don't want to overpower it, but you just want to get some liquid in there to kind of help keep that cooking process moving along. How I knew that was happening is in the middle of the stirring process, you could kind of hear that high sizzle, like that's very rapid. It's no longer like a boil or a little pop here and there. That's a good sign that it's starting to dry out and that you want to add some liquid of your choice. So we'll stir that up. We're not going to add any extra salt right now, even though we added another ingredient into it, because we're going to give those tomatoes a chance to cook down and trying to transform into what they're going to be at the end of this. We're going to keep adding greens into it now that we've got the deglazing process done. This will be the last batch we add. We're going to add one little more pinch of salt. Again, I'm familiar with what this salt does to it. You should always try it, see where you're at. It's always easier to add than take away. What the salt will do throughout this also is it'll help draw all the natural moisture out of the greens or any vegetables that you add into it. At this point, we're gonna add our red pepper flakes. Probably gonna measure out about I would say about a tablespoon. Kind of let those go in there and let them perfume throughout through the oils. With the mustard powder, we're gonna add a teaspoon of it. Mustard powder's in there. We're gonna give this a little bit of a stir to kind of incorporate everything. If you haven't noticed by now, we haven't quite got to the part where we just let this thing simmer and go and have its fun. We're still stirring because we're still over a good amount of heat and we're still adding. So at this point is a good chance if you like using this chicken bouillon. We're gonna add about a teaspoon of it. This stuff is salted, so we're not gonna go too crazy with it yet until we get everything incorporated into the dish. So we've added chili flake, mustard powder, bouillon. We're gonna taste it a little bit. Again, to taste that solidity, see if we need to add some, because we're about to go in with some vinegar, chicken broth, and the rest of our tomatoes, and we're gonna put the lid on this sucker and let it go to sleep for a little while. For my liking, tomatoes are still a little young in the pot, but I know where they're gonna end up. So I'm gonna probably add about probably 3-finger pinch of salt. We are gonna add a little bit, probably another 2 teaspoons of bouillon to it to kick up that depth of it. Stir that in, and then we're gonna go in with the amount of tomatoes that we wanna finish this off with. So we're gonna add the rest of our tomato chunks that we've squeezed all the goodness out of. We'll give that a stir, and then we're gonna take our chicken broth. So with the addition of the chicken broth, we're gonna add it, kind of keep things moving a little bit so that way we can make sure that the broth gets in all of the little nooks and crannies. Make sure everything, scrape that side. You don't want anything burning up on the sides of the pot. Anything at this point that starts burning or caramelizing can render itself to be bitter, and we don't want that. We've been saying that word a lot throughout this, is because the acidity and the ingredients that we're using do tend to get bitter really quick when they're overcooked or burnt. So adding stock all the way till we're covered. So we're gonna stir it, make sure everything's good. Give it a little quick taste for salt in the broth. We're very close. So we're gonna let this come to a simmer. Make sure we're good, stir it around, nothing sticking to the bottom. Then we're gonna put the lid on it and let it take a little nap for a little bit. So about 45 minutes, we're gonna stir it throughout the process every 10 to 15 minutes just to make sure we're not getting anything sticking on the bottom or the sides to where it'll burn and waste all this hard work that we've tried to create. So make sure that your light's over medium high heat once you get to that simmer. You don't want it at a rolling boil. You want it to braise. And then we'll let that sit, and then we'll be back in 45. All right, been about 45 minutes. We've been stirring it 10, 15 minutes in between. Now we're gonna come back in, give it one last little stir, kind of make sure everything's playing nice, not sticking to the bottom. Again, we're not trying to bring this to a rolling boil or anything, just a nice little low simmer. But as far as acid goes, I prefer apple cider vinegar. So we're gonna free pour this, do a couple glug glugs, get that incorporated in there, stir it around. You don't have to let the acid cook a whole lot because it's gonna kind of do its thing just to brighten the dish. We're not really using it to do anything else besides bring excitement to your taste buds in the form of brightness. So we're gonna give it a little bit of a taste. We're good. And then, so we're gonna let it go for another hour or two and then let it sit there and let it braise for another hour or two, and then we'll check it for doneness. And at that point, we should be good to go. All right, guys, it's been about an hour and a half. We're gonna check up on our greens, give them a quick stir, and then do a little bit of a plate up. Oh yeah, baby. So everything's looking good. Nothing sticking to the bottom. We'll go ahead and cut that heat. If you're hosting a party or something, this is a great, and especially out here at camp, we like to serve it up in these old cast irons because this cast iron will keep that residual heat throughout the process. Serve it up right out of it. So we're about to plate this up. This has turned out everything that I grew up eating, dreaming about, and being a part of. What makes this one probably more special than any of them is the Gamekeeper's Butchery Wild Boar Tasso. The flavor that it's brought to this dish is something that you really can't get anywhere else. It creates that depth, the spices of the paprika, and all the other ingredients that they add and cure into it. So what we're gonna do is take a bowl. I eat it out of a bowl. Usually a lot bigger than this. It'd probably be a big old cereal bowl, but this is what we'll use. Grab your greens. Again, that pot liquor is what it's all about. So load up the greens that you want, making sure that you stir it all around, get that tasso, onions, and tomato. So what we have here is the finished product. This is single-handedly one of my favorite dishes for this cold winter deer camps. We got a wild boar tasso braised greens and that amazing pot liquor. This will set you right for these cold winter months after a long day out there hunting.